How's it going, PengPiratesCrew? It's Adrian, and we're back with another video. So today is going to be a little bit of a different topic today, but I think it's really important, especially if you guys are participating in the online tournaments, the online regionals, online treasure cups. I don't know if you guys have known this, but there have been a lot of videos on Twitter circling around where there's just a huge amount of cheating going on. So today I wanted to focus on what can you as a player do to stop it? Like, what are the signs that someone is cheating? What should you do when someone is cheating? Because as of right now, a lot of these games are resurfacing after the matches, so TOs actually can't do anything about it regarding like to DQ the player during the tournament and, making sure that they don't like keep cheating and going to top 8 and doing all of that. So let's get right into it. And we'll even get to look at these examples on Twitter so we know what this looks like, when it's happening in the moment. All right, so number one, the most important thing is always be watching what your opponent is doing on their screen. This might be a simple one, but I know we could go into autopilot mode, especially me, like in these online tournaments, like a lot of the time because I'm in my house, it's just like, I'm very not absent-minded, but it's I'm not as attentive as I would be as the in-person events, because usually for the in-person events you don't really need to monitor what your opponent is doing all the time. People rarely cheat in them because it's just so much harder to. And your opponents don't have a lot of opportunities to cheat because, One Piece is not a game where there's a lot of shuffling involved. You rarely get to shuffle your deck throughout a match. But with that being said, yeah, cheating will still happen. There'll still be ruling stuff. But the number one thing is just always watch what your opponent is doing on the computer screen. Since it's on Discord, have your opponent's window be bigger than yours. I see a lot of players, they play on Discord and they have their windows equal, where you don't really need to see your own cards, right? They're right in front of you. So it's really important that you have your opponent's Discord maximized so that you could just see everything that's going on, because you really need to see the whole camera to kind of distinguish if they're cheating or not. And number two that we're going to talk about is do not be afraid to call a judge. I feel like a huge reason why that some of these clips are coming out after their tournament match is mainly because the players in question were too scared or too uncomfortable to call out their opponent. Because what I'm seeing on the Discord is it's a little bit uncomfortable and you don't really want to, call out your opponent like that, especially if they're not cheating, right? It would be awful to call a judge when it turns out they weren't cheating at all, they just made a simple mistake. But in my opinion, if you're being honest about it and you honestly have a gut feeling that someone is cheating, you should call the judge. And that's what they're there for in the first place. Don't think of judges as people that just come in and they're gonna immediately ban this person. They are there to judge the situation and they're there to determine, was this cheating or not? Was what this person done an honest mistake? Because they've seen a lot of these different scenarios. So my number two tip is just do not be afraid to call a judge. Do not be afraid to let your opponent know, hey, if this happens again, I will be calling a judge. If it was an honest mistake, that's completely okay. But you don't have to be a jerk about it, right? You could always just say, if this happens again, I'm going to be calling a judge. Please don't do this again. Or, give them a warning hey, I understand this was a mistake, but please don't do that again. You don't want to be a shark, right? But if you honestly think that someone is cheating, you should be able to communicate that with a judge and communicate that with the player. And if you're not cheating and this happens to you, try to be understanding. We're all trying to be competitive in this game. We're all trying to have fun and have an honest game, and mistakes happen. That's okay. But don't get offended if someone, calls a judge on you, even though you just made a simple mistake. I know a lot of people like to call that sharking, like to call that nitpicking for things, but in all honesty, with how much cheating is going on, I wouldn't blame a person for, being a little on edge. And the last point kind of goes into my third one: record all of your matches. So for most tournaments, and I know for the Carta Magica tournament coming up, you actually don't need your opponent's consent to record the match. You do need your opponent's consent if you're streaming the match. You also need your opponent's consent when you're going to share the match, if you're going to post it on YouTube, for example. But if you're just recording for your own purposes or to deter cheating, you actually don't need to let your opponent know that you're recording. And it's better to record your opponent because obviously the judge wasn't there in the call to see what went down. So if you end up recording your matches, it's going to be a lot better on both of you since you have that hard evidence. And to be honest, it might be a little bit better if you do let your opponent know that you're recording. Just be do you mind if I record? I had a couple opponents just ask me do you mind if I record? And I of course said yes, of course. Because no one's face is being involved. There's not a lot of privacy issues going on, right? It's most of the time it's just the board. So if your opponent does feel a certain type of way of being recorded, I would definitely raise some red flags about that, because most of the time it's going to be because they're cheating and they don't want to get caught. Because you don't want to get into a situation where it's like he said, she said, and you don't have any evidence to back up that they were cheating. And I just want to stress this again, make sure that you're calling the judge in the middle of the match, or once the match is over, if you have time after the round, go ahead and call the judge. Because it's one thing to call out a cheater, but you really do not want them to get away with what they did after the fact, because it's a lot harder for TOs to figure out what to do with that. There's not a lot they can do, especially if the rankings are up. But if you do it in real time, if you do it, during the event, that cheater could just get DQ'd right on the spot. And the fourth one is a little bit more specific, and we'll see an example of this. But when you go for searches, or you're, looking at your cards, thinking about what to do, always just take a couple of seconds to see what your opponent is doing. We're gonna see in one of the clips that a person obviously cheated, but it's not obvious in the moment because the person that was playing in the clip was going for a Dodon search. So what is happening is the player is in their thoughts, and they're also just looking physically at their cards, not looking at the Discord screen. And then because of that, the player gets to take advantage of, cheating, grabbing an extra card. What I would do is the first couple of searches, I might just pretend that I'm looking at my cards, but in actuality, I'm staring right at the Discord screen just to see what my opponent is doing. And if their hands are getting out of screen. So yeah, just make sure whenever you're doing a vulnerable task, searching or shuffling your deck or whatever, or you're just, in thought with your cards, just make sure that you're looking at the Discord screen. A lot of people are not slick about cheating. It's not like they're doing some, sus shuffles or anything. Most of this cheating is literally just grabbing cards out of frame. So it's kind of easy to tell when this is happening. If you have an opponent where you see their hands going off of frame a lot, that is a situation where I would let my opponent know, hey, can you just keep your hands in frame? I don't want to call the judge, but if your hands keep going out of frame, then this is going to be an issue, because I don't know what's happening when you're, grabbing these cards. And I know for me personally, during the tournament, I dropped Dawn, I dropped cards, and I always let my opponent know, I will drop my hand onto the mat and then just be like, I dropped something, can I go and grab it? They could see how many cards I have in hand, because you don't want to grab something off of frame with the cards in your hand, because that's super sus. That is going to make people suspicious of you. So just, I understand people drink water and stuff like that. Maybe you're snacking or whatever, so you have to, grab something off screen, but just make sure that you let your opponent know that you're doing it, and then also drop your hand to the mat at least. But in general, always keep your hands in frame and try to refrain from grabbing stuff off screen, because that's a huge problem for us. But yeah, if your opponent, they're fiddling around too much off screen, you see their hands go up, that's a clear indication of cheating that we're going to look at. One of the most common ways that these players cheat is they have their hand in frame, and then for some reason their hand needs to go all the way up to their face, and then you'll usually see their arm grab something. They're not slick about it at all. But yeah, with that being said, let's get into examples that we saw on Twitter so we could see what this actually looks like in practice. So I think this is a pretty good example of an obvious case of cheating. We have this player here, when they're going for counter, it's obvious that, they counter with the Otama Rad Beam. I don't know how much they're swinging for, but then obviously right here, he takes his hand away from the camera and just kind of grabs something out of frame, right? Because he puts two cards down, and then all of a sudden his hand comes up. He very obviously switched a card out for something else, and then all of a sudden, he has just enough counter to squeak by with a win. This is a very easy case to spot because, if you're swinging into him, if you're his opponent, you're gonna be looking at what he's countering with. So I feel these ones are easier to catch, but they end up getting a lot more tricky, as we're gonna see later on. But yeah, this is just an attentiveness thing. Always make sure you are looking at what your opponent is doing. I usually have it in this view as well. I think this player is really smart for having it in this full view, because you don't need to see your camera, right? You want to see your opponent's full camera, and always be attentive. And luckily this player was attentive. Clyde TCG, he was able to contact the judge before the round was over, which was really good. But for other players, I know it's online, we could kind of get automatic, we just assume these people are going to be in good faith, but it's just this type of cheating is just so obvious, and no one should get away with this. But yeah, this is one of the first instances that I saw like in the past 2 weeks of cheating. This was, I think, Core TCG's tournament, and looking down at the comments, it looks like you'll get DQ'd and probably banned for cheating. And I think this is like the best way to do it. And I've seen a lot of remedies for this, and I do think like lifetime bans or just really harsh punishments for cheating is something in the realm of possibility of solutions. Because, and I don't mean to sound like, I don't know, like a totalitarian like guy, but making an example of these people, like having these individuals think, oh, is it even worth it to cheat if I'm not going to be able to play this game legitimately? That might be enough of a deterrent to stop it. And especially for these like really blatant cheaters, right? Like this would happen a lot less if people were a lot more scared of what the consequences were for cheating. But I think because they're not like standardized and they're not clear, you know, Bandai hasn't taken action against these cheaters yet. It's up to us as a community and up to the tournament organizers to like just come up with these different consequences for cheating, because I feel like that's a softball punishment compared to everything else. I mean, like to enter these tournaments, it's only $30. So they're basically going, you know, minus $30 for doing something that just completely derails a tournament, not only for its players, but for its tournament organizers, right? It's a huge hassle for tournament organizers to deal with cheaters. I definitely think we should be more vocal about these cheaters and what happens to them. And, you know, like if they get banned, you know, if there's some action being taken so that we can deter other cheaters from doing it. All right, so now we're gonna get into a more discreet version of cheating. Like to us, it's easy to spot because, you know, we're not in the moment playing the game. From before, it was pretty easy to spot for the player because, you know, they were swinging for game and it's not like you're looking at anything else on the camera. But for this case, it's really difficult to, because he's actually in the middle of a Dodon search. This is from Nas Juice. This is something really disgusting happening, right? So you could see that the player on the left, he goes in for a Dodon search, and while he's looking at his cards, not looking at his camera, this player over here is gonna, you know, his hand rises above the camera, which is like a clear indication of cheating, in my opinion. Like whenever I'm playing personally, whenever my hands are like out of frame, like I try my best to like put them back in frame. Whenever I need to do something like with my hands, like, you know, sometimes I'll drop a Dawn on the floor, or like a card will drop on the floor that I'm holding. I put my entire hand down and then go for whatever. And then I also let my opponent know. So like this, so I feel like, you know, when your opponent has their hands out of frame, that should be a warning already. You should be able to call the judge for it. And I don't know the exact ruling on that, but I do think that should be the bare minimum. Like you should be able to see the hands at all times. And as a player participating in this tournament, it's only fair that you don't even feel bad. Like if your opponent is doing sus things, like having their hand out of frame, or, you know, having their cards not visible, make sure to let them know that you will be calling a judge if it happens again. Do not feel bad for doing this sort of thing, because at the end of the day, you are there to compete and you are there to do your best. And, you know, if it happens on accident, that's fine. Like it happens on accident. You know, accidents happen, people have habits, but you're also not a jerk for pointing out when these things happen. And it just gives everyone like a sense of etiquette around the issue. Oh, by the way, I make a little cameo in this. The cheating's not good, but I mean, like, I'm right here. This is my round 3. But yeah, see, his hand goes up and out of the frame, and you could see like part of his arm is reaching again, like off screen, like our first one was doing. And then he's going to bring that arm back. And once he's switched out the card, his hand's gonna come back down into frame right when he's like thinking about his Dodon search. So this is like a really dirty way of cheating. And what I would do in this situation, honestly, is, you know, the cheater can't see what your face or your eyes are looking at. I would definitely be just a little bit suspicious of people. When you go for a search like this, instead of immediately looking through your cards and like immediately thinking about what you have to do, I would take a couple of seconds just like pretending to riffle through your like search or whatever, and then I would just check what my opponent is doing, because now that we have the knowledge that people are doing this, like people are hiding their cheating within, you know, these vulnerable points of your play where you're like looking at your cards, or, you know, you're heavy in thought. Like I would just take a couple of seconds, a few seconds beforehand, just to see what my opponent does when I'm doing something vulnerable like this. Because it's really difficult to see in the moment, but, you know, as we're kind of looking at it, it is kind of like this whole move right here is really suspect. Like your opponent has no reason to kind of bring their cards all the way up out of frame like this. Like, if we're thinking about the card placement position wise, like it's down at the table, and then all of a sudden he needs to bring his cards like all the way up to his face. There's no way that is happening, right? So just be very attentive. If you're going for something vulnerable like a search, or like looking through your deck in some way or something like that, just make sure that you take those couple or a few seconds just to check what your opponent is doing. Make sure they're not doing anything suspicious. And if you want to know my stance on if we should put these cheaters on blast, I 100% think we should put these cheaters on blast. So this guy's name is Steven Deck. If you ever play against him in a tournament, especially one of these online treasure cups, just be on the lookout. If we can't punish these players in a way like through Bandai or through the tournament organizers, it's really important that whenever a cheater is caught, especially if they're willing to cheat in a big online tournament like this, that we as players are aware of who they are and what they're about. Because at the end of the day, this card game is about community and community building, but it's also about competition. It's fun to gather, at locals and, see who's gonna beat who on the day and everything like that. But that whole dynamic breaks down when you have a couple or a few people like cheating and, just breaking the integrity of the game. And we have people that are legitimately trying to prove to others that, they're top cut material, that they're competitive material. So when we have cheaters like this, we definitely need to put their names on blast for sure. Don't do anything crazy like, like dox or send hate, but we just need to be aware of who these players are and what they're about. And this isn't just like a one-time thing either. Like, this is another clip of another player finding him cheating where he's doing the exact same move. He's like looking through his cards, riffle shuffling, and then his hand goes up and you could see him grab something from off frame and his hand goes down. And this is absolutely crazy because this is at table 19. Now, I don't know what round this is, but this is not a low table to be at, right? So you must have a pretty good record going into the tournament at this point. So this is happening with top cut people. Like our top competitors are trying to just cheat their way out for wins. And I hope he learns from this because it's definitely not cool to do this. Not only are you ruining the competitiveness of the game, you are ruining people's prizing, like actual money that they can be having by, selling these Luffys, by selling these prizing. So it's not just, like I want to keep the integrity of the game. You are actively harming people's, livelihoods by taking up a spot with your disgusting cheater behavior. And this is the last clip we'll look at. This is from Stillman Steve, and this one is really crazy. So at the time they cheated, this was a top cut game. Like at 7-0, you are so close to completely winning and having a shot at just winning the whole tournament. So let's go ahead and watch over this clip and see what he does. The cheater is going to be on the left here. So you can see he rests 2 Dawn for a guard point and a radical beam, and a Jozu and a Vista. And this is all the cards in his hand. He's gotten rid of all the cards that were originally in his hand. And then for some reason, out of nowhere, his hands go out of frame and he just gets an Atmos out of nowhere. So what I find crazy about these cheaters is they all have like the same game plan too. Like they have like a setup where they have like just cards on the side here. And then like they're gonna be like, oh yeah, I'm just like stretching or whatever, and then I'm gonna grab this card out. And this one luckily is also just very, very blatant. As you're watching this, it's kind of like, where did you get this extra card? Because you could clearly see that he's gotten rid of all the cards in his hand. Like, it's not even slick in the way that he's like replacing one of his cards that like, maybe it doesn't have counter, or maybe it's just not enough counter, but it's just like, dude, like you emptied out your entire hand. Where is this last counter card coming from? And it's just so pathetic, and it's so desperate for them to do this because it's like you're 7-0. Like, and Steve even mentions down here that earlier in the turn he discards a 1k counter to save the Marco, and if he doesn't do that, he loses without cheating anyway. So it's just like, it's not even worth it to do this. But yeah, getting more specific into it, he swings 16k with his leader. Cheater has 4 cards in hand, 2 Dawn up, no blockers. And then yeah, clearly at 8 seconds, he's used up all his cards. He can't counter out of it. He just needs the extra 1k. And thankfully, the judge answered his call quickly. He was DQ'd. But the crazy thing about this is, again, he was explicitly asked not to share this by staff, which I understand, which, if any TO or anything wants to like clarify this in the comment section, because I don't know from behind the scenes why they do this or why you would want to do this. I assume it's probably because, you know, like things like doxing exists, and there's just like a lot of harmful things that could come out from putting them on blast. But in my opinion, I think these players should be put on blast, full blast. We should know who they are, especially if they're going to be put in multiple online tournaments. And also, at the very least, if we can't put these players on blast, we should at least know if any action has been taken against them. Because as Steve like voices it out here, he doesn't even know if this cheater was banned for what he did. He knows that he got DQ'd, but what about the other ramifications to prevent this from happening again? Because again, losing your prizing for this tournament isn't that big of a deal when you're cheating throughout the whole thing. It's just a $30 buy-in, you go minus 30 and minus, you know, like the few hours you've been playing the game. But other than that, you could just do it again in another tournament, and you might even get better at it, honestly. So we need to have standards in place to get these cheaters banned from events. But in my opinion, if we're not gonna know like who these cheaters are, we should at the very least know what happens to these cheaters. Because for most of these cases, like the worst thing I've seen is that they get DQ'd, and then there's like maybe they get banned, but that's not as satisfying as understanding what happens to these cheaters and kind of deterring other cheaters from facing that like lifetime ban or something like that. So I want to end the video off just by stating how I feel about the online regionals in general and like online tournaments, because a lot of people are saying that they shouldn't exist, and like this is exactly why they shouldn't exist. And I agree, cheating is way easier on the online tournaments than it is in the in-person tournaments for sure. But I do still think that the online regionals and the online treasure cup still should exist, because from an accessibility and a growth standpoint, it's really, really good for the game. A lot of card games that I've played in the past, like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, they're really hard to get into like super competitively, because all of the high level events, if you don't live near places with big locals, like if you don't live in Florida, you know, next to Pro Play Games, if you don't live next to Core TCG, it's very difficult to get to these in-person tournaments. And that's not even addressing the fact that, you know, if someone has a disability or some accessibility issue, it's probably way harder for them to come out. But in my opinion, I love the idea of an online tournament. Usually I would not be able to compete at a high level like this, you know, because it costs a lot of money, I have to plan a lot, and overall, like being a grad student, I'm just so busy in my life. So it's really nice that I can still have the option to be a competitive player while having and addressing all of my other responsibilities, and, you know, saving a bunch of money because I don't have to pay for like a plane ticket and a place to stay in like another state. I could just do the tournament here at the comfort of my home and have a good time and, you know, get to meet a bunch of people. But again, the cheating is really deterring people from participating in the online tournaments, and also it's just ruining the competitiveness of them overall. People are starting to see them not as like real events almost because of how much cheating goes on. And the cases that we saw today were just the ones that got caught. So just imagine all of the cheating that, you know, goes undocumented, unrecorded. In general, I think we should still have online treasure cups for sure. Online regionals might be a little bit iffy because I know that people were a little bit skeptical of the cheating, and especially since they're like inherently more competitive since you get the NAT invite. But in an ideal world, you know, we would keep these online events and the in-person events because it's just great for accessibility and growth for the card game. A lot of people that usually wouldn't be participating in these big tournaments do get to participate in them because of the online regionals. But before we fully consider them to be, you know, like competitive options, we need to first address this cheating issue. But let me know what you guys think. Are there any solutions that I didn't mention or that you've come up with? Because I do feel like the TOs really do listen to the community in these videos, and it did feel like that for the online regional signups. But yeah, let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.